Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for another PB&J video and some holiday inspiration. And for today's card, I'll be using Penny Black's slapstick cling stamp called Winter Solace. And I just love this stamp. I think it has just such a special and magical look to it. And this is a look at the card we'll be creating today. I wanted this to have a sort of a smoky, vintage look to it, almost like an old postcard that you might find. And just real quick here, I'm popping up a complete supply list, but I will put this back up at the very end of the video on screen. So if you want to look at it in more detail at that time, you can just hit pause and check it out more closely. It has all the Penny Black products and all of the other products that I'm using today. So to begin, I am stamping in my Misty stamp positioning tool, and I'm stamping onto Wendy Vecchi Perfect Cardstock panel. This is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 cardstock panel, which can be mounted then to a standard size A2 card. And this ends up being a 1-layer card, so it is very great for mailing if you have a lot of cards to mail. I'm starting out by inking my stamp using Ranger Archival inks, and this color is Shadow Gray. And because this is the mini size, I can easily get this ink just on top of the church, and then if I get any little bit that goes over onto the trees, I just wipe that off with my finger, or you could use a paper towel or a baby wipe to do so. I will kind of turn my stamp positioning tool as needed so that I can get into sort of the nooks and crannies where I want that to go. I'm going to add some extra shading here using the color of Cobalt. These are all colors from Wendy Vecchi for the Ranger Archival inks, and I just really love these colors, and that is the reason I've chosen them for this project or for this step of my stamping. You can use any type of ink pad for this because we will be sealing it in with embossing powder, but I do find, like I said, these colors are fantastic, and also that mini size works really well for sort of getting into the certain areas on the stamp. I love the way the shadow gray and the cobalt work together here. Now, at any point in sort of the design that I'm doing today, a person could totally stop when you're happy with the effect that you have. So if you want to see more detail to your images, then once you have them, like here on the church, if you just wanted to have this be the blue and the gray and still see some of those bricks and different areas to it, then you would stop at that step. I'm going to go in and add some additional sort of shading and blending out with distress markers. But like I said, you can, when you're doing this, stop at whatever point that you are happy with or what style of card that you are going for. But the more inks and the more layers you add, you may get more depth of color, but you might lose some of the very small details that are included within the stamp. So it's really up to you how much you want to see. So I did some layering with that cobalt color, and then I'm going back in some of those same areas and just adding even more. And you can see there, like on that corner, how much darker that makes it. I'm not too worried about exactly where the light is coming from and where my shadows go. I'm just looking for some depth of color on the building and a little bit darker areas under sort of the eaves of the roof or under those roof lines. And I'm going back again now with that shadow gray to sort of blend out those areas where it moves from the gray into the blue. It just helps so that there aren't any harsh lines where one color stops and another color begins. And I love how these stamps are so perfect for sort of layering different colors, but you can get all of it done with just one stamp. So you can just keep going in with your stamp positioning tool, adding more colors, adding more shading, but all using just one stamp. So now I'm going to move in and ink up the trees. And for these, I'm going to use a combination of two colors. I'm using Fern Green and Library Green, and both of those are, again, those mini archival inks, and they are the colors by Wendy Vecchi. And again, I am stamping that same color a couple of times just to capture all of the detail and also to darken it up. If I get any there on the church, I just wipe it off with my finger. And if you don't want to have inky fingers like I do at the end of the day, you could use a paper towel to do that too. And there's so many different ways you can do this stamp. Like as I'm watching this video, as I do the voiceover here, I'm thinking, oh, it really looks nice just like this. If you wanted to keep your card very simple, you could really just stop here or add a sentiment or just some very light gray or light blue inking around your edges. And you'd have a really dynamic card just by stamping this a few times. So you can do so many different things with these type of Scenic stamps from Penny Black. Here is that library green color. I'm adding that near the base of the trees, stamping it a couple of times just to get some more variation in color, which adds more depth to the scene. And let's see here. I must be thinking. I'm going to wipe off my stamp. I want to clean this really well. I wiped it off with a baby wipe and just patting it dry with a paper towel. And then I'm going to emboss this image now. So I haven't moved it in my stamp positioning tool, and I haven't moved the stamp at all or the paper. I rubbed an anti-static bag over my stamped panel, and that just keeps the embossing powder only on the areas that I want it. And now I'm going to ink my stamp with Versamark ink. And I'm going to just do a few impressions of this to make sure that everything is completely covered. There's a lot of detail to this, so I want to be sure that it's all covered. And by doing this, I'm going to next sprinkle this with clear embossing powder and heat that to set it. And what that will do is sort of seal in all those colors beneath. So as we continue working on this, those colors will stay true and they won't change no matter what we add to the sky or the background. So I'm just sprinkling that with that clear embossing powder, and I'll heat to set it. Now the windows and also the roof line and the areas on the trees where it's white snow, those are not stamped. So if we want to add any color to those now, we can go in, and I'm just coloring those with some distress markers. And I'm also going over some of these areas of the brick here with a distress marker. I didn't want that to be stark white, so I just am sort of fading that out. And that sort of goes for that vintage effect that I wanted for this particular card design. I'm also adding just a touch of shading on that roof line. It's kind of hard to see here on the video, but it's a little more apparent in real life. And now I'm going to take a Versamarker. So a Versamarker has the same kind of ink in it as the Versamark pad. You're just applying it with the brush tip of the marker. And so I am coloring over all of those white areas in the trees where the snow would be, because I want to be able to sort of seal that in as white. So when I do my background, if I'm adding yellow to the sky, it doesn't go onto the trees. Same thing here along that roof line of the church. I want that to stay that color. Any of those areas of the bricks that I colored with my marker, the windows, I'm going to color those with the Versamarker. I'll sprinkle that with the clear embossing powder. Heat it to set, and now all of those areas will also be sealed in, just like the rest of the stamped image. So now I can begin working on my background. I'm going to use the Wendy Vecchi Make Art Blendable Dye Inks to do this. And you can see here as I go over my image, those areas that are embossed are going to resist that color, and it will only apply to the sky or the background. The first color was sunflower, and now I'm adding just a touch of orange blossom, and I sort of wanted this sky to sort of look like it's glowing right up beyond the steeple or the top of that church. Now for any areas where you are applying ink over the stamped and embossed areas, you do not want to use an archival ink because those are permanent, or any type of permanent ink. You want to use like the Make Art Blendable Dye inks or your distress inks, because those are not permanent and the embossed areas will resist them. So up in the corners of the sky, I used that cobalt blue that I used to stamp the church because I wanted to pull in that color up at the top. But that was okay because they were not on any of the embossed areas. It's just up in the open cardstock. I'm also adding now some, let's see here from my list. This is cornflower blue, sort of tone down and add to the vintage look up in that sky. I'm using a dry paper towel to wipe off the embossed areas just to remove any excess ink that might be sitting on top of there. And I'm just going to continue on this background, applying my inks till I'm happy with the look. I'm using ink blending tools with foam pads to apply all of the ink here. I'm also going to add just a touch to the snow areas to create a shadow. And now I'm using the detail blending tool. This is from Ranger, and this has just a little piece of foam at the top, and it allows you to get right in with your inks and apply that shadow and have lots of control in applying it to very small area. So I'm using a couple of these blue colors to add that shadow around the bottom of the church. And again, just wiping off those embossed areas. I thought that snow looked a little bit too bright, so I'm going in again with that cornflower blue to sort of tone that down. And I want to make sure all those inks that I applied to the background are totally dry. So I just heated that up with my heat gun. And I just can't stop with the background. So I do spend a lot of time when I'm making cards going back and adding more and more layers of color. I usually start lighter and then I get braver as I go and just keep adding colors. So I'm really happy with what I've done. Now to add to the vintage look of this, I'm adding a very, very light layer of antique linen, distressing sort of all over the background. And that you can't see very well in the video again, but it does sort of tone everything down and give it sort of that vintage look. I'm also going to add a little bit of gathered twigs around those upper corners and edges. And a little bit here along the ground line too. And I do apologize, I did go back and add with a white gel pen just a little bit of lines down at the bottom of the church in that shadow to give more of the look of snow. I thought I was recording, but I wasn't. So I just wanted to mention that. You may notice it in the final photo. Now it's time to stamp my sentiment, and it's from our transparent set Joyful Sentiments. I love the fonts included on these sentiments. And this particular stamp, the church stamp, leaves you just the perfect spot to put a sentiment over here on the left side. I'm stamping this with Acorn Archival ink. I just love that dark brown color. And now I'm going to add some snow to the background. So I've put some Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus watercolors in the color of titanium white onto an acrylic block, and I'm just mixing that with water and my paintbrush and splattering it all over the background. Once I was done, I decided I didn't really like how it looked all over the church, just kind of distracted from that. So because that is all embossed, it's very forgiving. I can just take a baby wipe and wipe off those splatters before they're totally dry. And then adding to some of the other areas and in a more opaque white color, I'm just using a white gel pen to add some more snow to the background. And I like the combination of some of the lighter splattered snowdrops and some of the more opaque and darker ones that are added by the gel pen. And once that's done, the card is complete. Here's a look at that finished card. It's ready to be mounted to an A2 size, standard size note card. And I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website and blog. And I will link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned. Here is that complete list of supplies that I promised at the beginning of the video. Thanks for watching.